Okay, I will just let everyone else trickle in as they come and get started here. So welcome everyone to the April 30th Building to Net Zero Community Practice. Um, and so today I really wanted to go a little bit of a different direction and talk about strong towns. And so while reading their book recently in the Escaping the Housing Trap book, I came across this really profound quote. In most places in this country, new homes are not allowed to be built. And so what I mean by that is that most suburbs are zoned for what they're currently built to, and you're not allowed to build higher than that. Or most farmland is zoned as farmland, and so you're not necessarily allowed to build on that until it's allowed. And so, we're facing a housing shortage in this country, and so housing is a big part of what we're working on at ICLEI, and what I know what a lot of you are working on. And so the neighborhoods must be designed to grow and look a little bit different. So today we're looking at emissions reduction from a little bit different perspective at a neighborhood scale instead of an individual home scale. And Strong Towns advocates for building smaller homes, fourplexes, walk-up apartment homes, filling in that missing middle in places which are already neighborhoods, creating denser, more livable communities for people, and satisfying the four criteria that I just came up with on how it relates to emissions. So those type of homes take less time to build and can be put up faster, creating new places to live for people. These homes can create affordability. We're in an affordability crisis right now, and affordability is a big part of what we need to do in municipalities. These homes are better for the environment and less costly to heat. Smaller homes, different home types can be much better performance. And these homes can be built closer to amenities like grocery stores, schools, and parks, allowing people to get out of the car and explore the community in a new way. And I'm sure Norm will get into this in a minute, but it all comes down to finances. Strong Towns is a nonprofit organization working to help communities across North America. They help municipalities better understand their balance sheets and evaluate neighborhoods on their benefits and costs. The fundamental argument is about the suburban experiment. Many single-family suburbs are not financially sustainable and might eventually take away from what your strong town or city is trying to build. And before I introduce them, I'm just going to jump into a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to take a moment to offer land acknowledgement as a community of practice focus on encouraging building development. It's important that we ground our work in the reality of the lands we occupy and the knowledge that has shaped these territories for millennia. ICLEI Canada's office is located in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. This land continues to be home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. Today, we face a renewed push for rapid development, new housing to address urgent affordability concerns, and new energy infrastructure to meet rising demand. We wanted to reflect on the complex history of that development. Throughout Canada's history, the legacy of development has often been a tool of colonization. Construction of railways, hydroelectric dams, and urban centers frequently involved forced removal of Indigenous peoples from their traditional territories. This is a process not always relegated to the past. As we engage in this work, we should ask ourselves, how do we avoid reproducing the harms of the past? Doing so requires that we understand this history, and more importantly, that we actively listen to Indigenous voices today, including the Indigenous knowledge that has long understood how to build in relationship with the land rather than at its expense. As we move through our discussions, I invite you to carry this reflection forward. Let us consider how our work can continue in a future where development respects Indigenous sovereignty, rights, and the wisdom of the original caretakers of this territory. And now, without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speakers today. So first, we have Norm Van Eden-Petersman from Strong Towns and Sean Champagne, the planning superintendent from the city of Medicine Hat. The Norm is the director of membership at Strong Towns, where he works to support and grow a movement of people committed to building financially resilient and people-oriented communities. He brings a grounded perspective shaped by hands-on experience in municipal government, along with a background in tree planting and farming that informs his practical long-term view of land use and stewardship. He's based in Delta, British Columbia today, and is also actively involved with Deltans for People-Oriented Places, a local advocacy group working to advance better land use policies and expand housing options in the community. And we also have Sean Champagne, who's a superintendent of planning for the city of Medicine Hat, where he has spent the last 10 years. He obtained his master's in urban planning from Université Aix-Marseille in Aix-en-Provence in France. Most recently, Sean was the project coordinator in the Community Action Lab undertaken by the City of Medicine Hat in partnership with the nonprofit organization Strong Towns. And take it away, Norm and Sean.
All right, it's wonderful to be with you, and I would love to know. And several of you have introduced yourselves in the chat already in terms of where you happen to be, but I would love to know how far we spread from coast to coast, and perhaps to coast as well. And so, if you want to drop in the chat where you are situated, then we're going to see the rest of our map sort of fill up in all of our different places. So I see. Just we'll give ourselves a moment here. And as you do that, I just want to say it's a great privilege to be able to share with you today. I was in conversation with one of a local city council member who is part of the climate caucus, and he said, "Oh, the type of work that we're doing on sustainability is so valuable and so important, and often reined in by the reality that we lack some of the core resources in our community to do the things that we know we should be doing." And yet we struggle because it's one cost among many that our communities are having to bear. And so a big part of my focus today will be on this question of how do we understand the impact and the role that our pattern of development has had on our communities, and what are some of the things that we can continue to do to address this. And so I'm grateful to be joined by Sean Champagne. Sean is fantastic. He is a really thoughtful, profound person. I'm sure you will soon appreciate that as well. So we've got a good cluster down in Ontario. That's awesome to see. We've got most of the provinces represented, just not northern communities, but it's great to have you here. I would love, if you have a moment, then post in the chat as well. How did Strong Towns come across your radar? But I should have added, if at all. So if you're totally new to it, actually, you could just put that in. If there's anything that either if you've heard of Strong Towns as an organization or as a message or as a movement, we are chiefly a member supported nonprofit. Our headquarters are in Brainerd, Minnesota, where we have our founder and president, Charles Marone, working. But actually, we have members all across Canada in every province except for Nunavut at this point. And we are, as a member supported nonprofit, able to share messages with civic leaders, with technical professionals, but especially our core base of concerned citizens. So new to you, this is fantastic then. I'm really excited for this. Sean got to connect with the Strong Towns message in Calgary. Grey Highlands, excellent, addressing development issues in struggling towns. And I love, Leah, we're going to have to chat if it's a favorite source of info. I love that in the work that you're doing. And we've had some of our materials translated into French, in part to try to help connect people in Quebec with the Strong Towns material as well. Interested in finding work and getting involved with improving communities and improving or promoting sustainability. My third question then is just quickly, how do you feel about your community? And in particular, when it comes to sustainability efforts, maybe pick a couple of words that describe how you feel about your community right now. If there's anything that here, maybe I'll type in mine. So, those would be my 5 words. My key thing is I love my place and I fear for my place. Where I am in Delta, we are beset by many of the same challenges that a lot of our communities face. In particular, being in the lower mainland of British Columbia, we have a real challenge with high land prices, making many projects unsustainable or really challenging to generate opportunities. But then I have loved ones that are in communities that are really struggling because investment has left or it's become difficult. And so, yeah, Nicoletta, beautiful, walkable, accessible, room for improvement, resistance, skepticism, and going broke in Medicine Hat, a strong foundation and moving to mainstreaming. All of those are fantastic. So if you want, you can continue to drop them in the chat, but I'll pivot over to my presentation here. And let's just set this up while we're chatting. There we go. That way you can see all the slides. This will be easier. And Sean said, Norm, you've got a lot of slides, and I do. But I'm going to bring Sean in at key points as we start to talk about Medicine Hat and the work that the city of Medicine Hat is doing to really address its long-term financial sustainability questions. What is a Strong Towns approach to reducing emissions? We've gone over the opening questions, but we were prompted on a podcast. Someone asked Charles Marone, who's the founder and president of Strong Towns, as an organization, as a movement, where we say that much of the responsibility that we have is from a bottom-up perspective to address what's going on in our communities. To use existing resources as effectively as we can, to harness and sort of tap into more of people's grassroots level ability to just address the challenges that they face, rather than waiting for grants to come in, money to come from afar, sort of big official policies to be passed, and saying there are a lot of things that we can just do one to another that can have a huge impact in our communities. And so the challenge at that point, and maybe this is one that you'll share as we go through, is bottom-up reform enough? Can we actually take action that is going to be more meaningful and more substantial if we use some centralized or top-down action? And at Strong Towns, we would say that one of the deepest challenges that we have is that we've gotten here to the position that we are in ever since the end of the Second World War and the real shift in the development pattern that's occurred, that the consequence of that type of centralized top-down action is now leaving us in a situation that we can't simply use the same tools to apply to the challenges that we face. We need a new set of tools, bottom-up, locally led action to really bring about the lasting change that we want to share and that we want to see. And so Sean is with us from the city of Medicine Hat, and they did a great job of sort of doing something that I think a lot of places are fairly familiar with, and you'll see the sustainability implications for this very clearly. This is the city in terms of its general its total boundaries. 1945, you have a core at the community situated around where the river runs, beginning to build up. And so this is where development was occurring within the community. You had adjacent smaller communities, but this is really where the heart of the city begins to emerge. But after the Second World War, we began to double down on a suburban pattern of development. And we saw this across Canada, across the United States as well. Lethbridge, where I grew up, similarly. By 1999, you can see significant portions of land being added to the city's land base. And by 2023, more neighborhoods being added, more sort of complete places being created. The question is, if you have periods of development, which all of our places do, some communities, this would go a lot longer back. Some places are more recent in terms of what we would say in terms of municipally incorporated patterns of development. We've had informal settlements and formal settlements in our places for a long, long time. But in this context, you can see sort of this would be pretty normal. The way that we think about it then began to raise the question, all right, what gave rise to sort of the outward expansion? And from a Strong Towns perspective, we would say, are we doing enough with the land that we've committed to housing and that we've committed to activity that we've taken out of a natural state or a farming state or a recreation state? And we've said, no, let's turn that into housing and let's turn that into economic activity lands. In that context, the question is, are we doing enough with it? And if you look at the specifics of the pattern of development of when the most recent building when the most recent building permit was taken out on each property, something really interesting emerges. And you would be able to do these types of analysis in your communities as well, that you can see generally the same map that we had over here sort of reflected in what we see in this map here in terms of everything that is in the outlying areas. But the fascinating part of it, and the part that as the city shared this with us at Strong Towns when we were working with them, they said, we actually had to triple check, did we mess up in our core area? In the areas that our community first began to develop, you can actually see this potpourri of colors, this potpourri of different decades, all being represented within the same space. And this, at Strong Towns, we would say is the core of what makes for strong communities. places that can adapt and evolve and be developed over time and in succeeding decades, rather than places that are developed in the suburban standard all at once and to a finished state. And the amount of land that we've committed suburban neighborhoods to be developed into that are completely finished all at once to a finished state, in those situations, then you get the type of stagnation that gradually begins to just require more land to be devoted to more housing and more economic activity at the outskirts, because the core areas are rendered off limits. And so for us, we take great inspiration from what our ancestors instinctively knew to do, which was make good use of land. And when you do that, you also begin to raise the floor of what you can do within your community as we go along with this. And here I want to bring in Sean, if you want to jump in, Sean, because this is how we've shared the Medicine Hat story, but you've been grappling with the question, what can we do now to be responsible stewards of land? Should we continue to devote large swaths of our community to future growth, or do we really begin to do this work of thickening up? Do you want to share a few reflections on some of the real challenges that your community has faced in this?
Of course, yeah. Thanks a lot, Norm. I really like these maps because it demonstrates, the growth in Medicine Hat, but this is the North American model. Every city is the same. One of the difficulties I had having people understand is Medicine Hat is incredibly remote. So we're about 2 hours from Lethbridge. We're 3 hours from Calgary. We don't have a whole bunch of satellite cities around us. So we have no shortage of land. And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand why we should build up when we have no shortage of land all around us. It's vacant everywhere. Land is super cheap. We have abundant land. It's not land the problem. It's the infrastructure that goes into place. It's the roads, it's the pipes, it's the electric lines, it's the gas lines. And what we discovered while working through this exercise is all of these areas in blue here that all built out at once, we're not collecting enough tax revenue from the residents that live there to even maintain the infrastructure that's in place there. So forget replacing this infrastructure, just keeping it running. We're having a lot of difficulty with that. And I mean, we're starting to see examples of that in Calgary, for example, with like water mains breaking. We had to do a sewer replacement in our downtown. You can see how compact our downtown core is. And it was like the sky was falling because we closed one road. I can't even imagine what's going to happen when we have entire communities all at once with infrastructure failing at the very same time. I don't know how we're going to pay for it. I don't know how we're going to get through it. So that's kind of the core messaging. And so what the approach we've taken in Medicine Hat is to halt growth entirely. We cannot our municipal development plan, which is our kind of top order plan in Medicine Hat, dictates that we cannot start a new subdivision until the previous subdivisions are within only 3 years of complete build out. And that way we can kind of stop this perpetual outward growth.
That's fantastic. And, I remember as well, there was particular neighborhoods where, because there were so few homes that had been built in those neighborhoods, there were significant public expenses to provide water care, continue to keep up the roads. The sun beats down on that patch of soil, whether or not something has happened in terms of the development that's occurring there, and the obligation of the public purse continues to grow. And I'm going to frame this in the context of the real challenge that we face. By us not creating increasingly independent neighborhoods, we also prevent that gradual thickening up of core centers, core little village areas that, from a sustainability perspective, when I was working in the city of Surrey in the mayor's office, we had one place that could viably support a district heating district. Or district heat. I know that's duplicating myself. That we had one area, because there was such a diffuse development pattern that it meant that doing things together actually became quite dicey, and it was hard to justify. We see this in the city of Richmond, near where I am, where, again, in their core area, as they've begun to build up, they've recognized now we can begin to tap into some of these tools that just don't scale and don't work when we try to spread them out with a limited base of support available to be able to provide for this. And so when we talk about creating assemblies of increasingly independent neighborhoods, I put on my hat as somebody who just wants to meet people. This is the absence of third spaces, meaning everybody has to drive off to go get to where they need to be rather than being able to stumble home from the bar that they just met someone at. We created these conditions through auto dependency, but we've also begun to really harm the potential futures that we would see happening in our places. And so I'm going to illustrate this, but I know that I'm going to have to move quite swiftly here. This is Grand Rapids, Michigan, but this, we take insight from history to say, what are the good things that we should be learning from this? And particularly, what are the things that are currently absent that we should see in a lot more of our places? You can see the complexity that's present here. You can see lot coverage being actually something that's valued in the creation of settlements, where you would leave much of the land as rural, and then you would begin to really build up something that was clearly urban. And in contrast, after the Second World War in particular, we introduced everybody gets a suburb. But suburb is truly suburban. And at Strong Towns, our question was, if for thousands of years in human history, we've not seen suburbs, are we sure that we're willing to embark on this experiment? So we call it the suburban experiment. Are we content to try out an experiment that says, what if we do something radically different? And the trouble that I had growing up is, even as a farm kid, I just assumed the suburbs were normal. Most of our civic leaders assume the suburbs are normal. And so at Strong Towns, we try to say places that do not allow for complexity, really have all kinds of requirements around lot coverage that prevent you from doing much with what you have, and forbid incremental growth and adaptation. That is an interloper. It's a new phenomenon in human history. And at Strong Towns, our core message is the suburban experiment is making our places weak and fragile. We've got to stop it. We've got to change course. And so this is Medicine Hat, where you can see in the core, that potpourri of all of the different decades of development occurring, you can see a lot of this similar type of activity that's occurring. And one of the challenges that the city of, I'm sorry, my puppy just pulled my desk around. The city of Cochrane worked with an organization called Urban 3. And they said, all right, can you assess financially how our community is doing? Because the finances of our place, the amount of private capacity in any community is what then allows you to take a portion of that for the public good. So no matter your perspective on taxes, you're probably meeting people that want to pay as little tax as possible, others that are willing to pay some. They don't mind their garbage being picked up and their water being taken or their sewage being taken away. In that context, what we do recognize is we need a significant reservoir of private capacity or private wealth in a place in order to then be able to provide for the public realm. And so in the context of Cochrane, Alberta, on the wrong side of the tracks, or the old side of the tracks, that development pattern was outperforming the new shiny stuff that they were building. There's a large there's a number of grocery stores, or hardware store. There's hotels. There's other stuff that's been added to the new downtown. But even in its new and shiny state, it's underperforming what was previously built. What, I could say this as a farm kid, what a bunch of farmers built, what a bunch of cowboys built back in the day, what a bunch of indigenous leaders said, hey, we're going to bring together resources in Cochrane, create a ranching community. They built simple, modest structures that used the land, that could be adapted. And notice, this is not even 2-story or, 10-story towers. This is 2-story structures that are outperforming the new shiny stuff that they had built. Or Medicine Hat, I asked Sean, as working with his public works colleagues, how much money that could otherwise have been spent on sustainability initiatives, on improving the fleet, on electrification, on all of that sort of stuff, instead got poured into the roads and the pipes and the sewage requirements, all necessary in order to provide for a power center in the community. And probably have these power centers, and the developer comes in and they are welcomed at City Hall because it's predictable growth. It's also an influx of permit fees and the recognition. All right, we now finally, in Lethbridge's context, we finally have an Olive Garden. We have arrived. But the trouble is, on a per acre basis, this returns $1.9 million per acre in terms of stored value that you can then tax. In contrast, they've got a great sugar daddy. this little sugar daddy building, sugar daddy cheesecakes. And I love this, Sean, just that it's called a simple, modest structure right in the downtown. This is an old building. It's been around for a long time. It has not been loved. There's, some love now being shown to it, and it vastly outperforms the brand new shiny stuff, which raises the question, what actually would help your community to be stronger, to have more of a tax base, more of a capacity to cover projects that are new, exciting, and novel, the types of things that would help your place. And a big part of it is going to be doubling down on patterns of development that are productive and create the conditions where you can actually, with modest improvements, increase the value of these types of properties. When you ask, what could we do to make this more productive? You're going to be really stuck. But if you added some planters, if the city rolled out another initiative to slow the cars and create the conditions for this to be an even better place, you would take care of your sugar daddy, and you would be improving it as a place that would then generate even more value. And we can see this on residential, for example. It's stunning that we, in our wisdom, in the suburban pattern of development, said, what if we restrict most forms of housing? Even though this is the exact same street in Medicine Hat, that shows that when you have that mix, when you have that diversity, when you allow somebody to use their building to earn income and provide housing, that it creates great opportunities. And again, all of this to create the base from which we can cover our costs. In Delta, where I live, we have a significant challenge. We have dikes to keep up. We have a lot of public infrastructure to keep up. So much so that for every dollar of public infrastructure, we only have $3 of private wealth that we can tax in terms of property values in our community. What that tells me is that anytime that my city sustainability coordinator comes forward with another project that says, hey, I think we could do this to help improve, the greenhouse gas emissions in our place, they are up against people who say, yeah, but we need to fund a dike so it doesn't flood when the next time the Fraser River peaks. They are up against the roads people who say we have 80% of our annual budget is devoted to roads and pipes. I don't think you realize how close we are to another Calgary, another challenge that we face. And in this context, what we then say is the prevailing pattern of development is making our places weak and fragile. Sean, can you jump in? And I want to ask you just on this side of like the preoccupation now in Medicine Hat around creating productive land use patterns. How is that beginning to shift the conversations around public investment decisions and things like that?
Yeah, thanks, Norm. So those last few slides are absolutely critical. That's how we're getting the messaging across, because, I'm not going to... Southern Alberta is very conservative. We have a lot of conservative folks down here, and I find that sometimes we'll find ourselves perhaps in an echo chamber of talking about sustainability, environmental sustainability. I think everybody in this room believes in those things and thinks that these things are true. We had a really tough time getting that messaging across to the public until we switched the narrative to talking about this strong fiscal analysis. That's how we got people on board, when we were able to demonstrate how much more tax revenue we're able to generate from these higher, denser forms of housing. A lot of people don't care about the vibrancy. They don't care about the environmental impacts of it, the benefits of that. They just want to know the bottom dollar. So we decided to kind of flip the script and then really have a lot of our messaging based around that. So we released, I'll share in the chat here, this is just a screenshot that I took from a YouTube video that we created when we were going through the Community Action Lab. And actually, I'll just show the video itself, but it was called Strong Towns Thinking. And on there, this would be an interesting video to watch after. We've got a portion where we were introducing a new 6-story apartment building that was being constructed in our inner city. And we focused entirely on the tax revenue it's going to generate. So it's a vacant lot, generates $5,000 of tax revenue. We could have built that with single family homes, just like the ones that are across the street. And that would have bumped up a little bit the tax revenue by maybe another $1,000 annually. But with this apartment building, it's up to $87,000. So that's how you kind of piques people's attention. And okay, now I'm interested. So yeah, the messaging on those previous slides, that's really the driver behind the success of the Strong Towns movement here in Medicine Hat.
Yeah, love that. Appreciate that, Sean, and totally, yeah, resonates with my own community as well. Perhaps you've had these conversations where people have said, "Oh, they're only doing, city council only approved it because they want more taxes." And I've been like, yes, and we all benefit when that occurs. In fact, it helps offset what otherwise would be a cost to us or a service cut to us when we can bring new participants in to help with this. And this is where this may be a little bit on the nose, maybe quite challenging. But things that we identify, like Sean said, sustainability is crucial. Being able to contend with like a hotter, drier climate in years to come, more intense storms, all of these challenges, the need to kick our addiction to foreign oil, all of these different layers of it, actually feel like they are must-haves. But then the must-haves get worn down by the can't justifies, which means then it becomes not feasible. So this is the city of Surrey, their district energy strategy. They are trying to do some of these elements, but you notice in the vision there, they have plans for a lot more, but they struggle because the base from which you would be able to do that is siphoned off in order to provide for more streets, more roads, more of the same that has gotten us into the challenge that we face in our communities. And that's where we have tried as much as we can to make a fiscal case for why we need to be able to change course in this way. Similarly, we sent several of our city staff in the city of Delta to, I think, several conferences now on the circular economy. And it's a good vision. And yet I asked them, like, what kind of funding are you getting? And in my words, they would say, we're getting just the scraps. We're getting just the scraps because there's not enough money in the banana stand to be able to meet our ongoing needs just for streets and roads and park upgrades and things like this. And the truth is, like, whatever this, I love this image from the government's description of the circular economy, but whatever that machine is, that's a pricey intervention. There is no, pop bottle to handbag tool just yet. And so it's a good vision, but it's held back by scarce resources. And when we have created places that are deliberately weak and fragile, we've actually removed from ourselves many of the future options that we would otherwise want to see. This is Sunnyvale, California, but if I didn't tell you, you would think it was your community. This is how much land we devote to the storage of vehicles, just purely to make sure that they have a place that they can sit idle, doing nothing, being available at a beck and call. And the question is, what about if we begin to reprioritize what we do with public land? What if we begin to reprioritize the standards that we set? At Strong Towns, we're adamant that we don't need municipally imposed requirements for parking because there's already a market requirement for parking. And the market requirement can go up and down. People can make a bet on too much parking or too little parking, and they will reap the consequences so that we can actually assume and trust that parking will still be something in our cities, but it will not look like what it currently does under our very archaic, pretty problematic rules around parking and things like this. Another area where this becomes really interesting, the same firm that did the Cochrane work, they worked on the eastern shores of Maryland, and they looked at sea level rise. So first they looked across Maryland. So this is broader. So this might be across Quebec. This might be throughout central and southern Ontario. This would be, imagine before 1952, where was the activity? And this is on the East Coast. So a lot of, hundreds of years of activity there. And yet when you actually say where is developed land, much of it is in, like I said, those urban clusters, those urban cores, very little in the form of suburban development. But then you begin to see post-1952 in the suburban experiment, this real change. And you can also, they use the taxable value per acre. You can see pretty quickly, if you were to just blink quickly, you would see where still the stores of value in these places are. And that's still in those same areas that were once developed back in the day. We've lost sight of what it takes to build lasting prosperity. So we build a lot of low return places that now are going to be struggling with the rise of sea level, with rising sea level. So what they said is, what happens happens when a lot of your developable land gets wiped away simply because of ocean rise. In that context, much of the activity means that you have to work within ecological areas, within wetlands. You're doing a lot of that development because the prime land that you devoted to development now no longer is available because you've rendered it off limits. And so they said, assuming a 3 feet sea level rise, if you were to develop in an area in a way that really began to modify the way that we create our places, you can save on infrastructure costs. You reserve a lot of available land for down the road. For climate mitigation, for having to remove communities, all of those different types of things is easier or more feasible if we have actually adopted a strategy that is using land much more effectively, and we leave money on the table. And I want to actually, I'm going to skip through this just because this is fascinating to me, of just, again, similar to the Medicine Hat story, but asking a slightly different question. The population density of Peterborough was in a sense, doing what we would expect. Peterborough was a nothing place or a not much place, to then becoming a place that had more people per acre or per square kilometer for us Canadians, continuing to grow up and thicken. And then the advent of the suburban pattern of development said, all right, what if we annex all of the available land around us and then begin to populate it with homes in low density residential suburbs? The result being that the population density has not altered in all of those years, even as, there's my second slide. Even as everybody gets more roads, even as everybody gets more sewage pipes, even as everybody gets more to keep up, yet the number of people who are able to cover those costs has not improved significantly. And this is part of when we talk about this, we say the reason we can't have nice things is because we bought too many of the wrong things. In Kansas City, the thing that everybody gets more of is more sewer pipes. But that's a tough thing when your population is not increased enough to be able to cover these new costs. Similarly, South Bend, Indiana, some of our places probably represented on the call have seen population declines. And the core question when you are declining as a population is, can we even hold on to what we have? And in South Bend's situation, as their development had shifted, they were continuing to double down on infrastructure, even as the base of people who could cover the cost of that infrastructure had declined. I can't even fathom a 6,000% increase. And that is a true, we've had, significant increase in the amount of miles of forest main and other obligations that our places have. I want to pause to highlight a quick note. This is my brother-in-law that wrote this book out of the city. He's in Winnipeg. But I would definitely recommend, if you have people in your community that are skeptical or uncertain, this book is very simple. It's written by Great Plains Press. It's written for a lay audience, which is especially our elected officials as well as residents within the community. It is the most accessible guide to asking, what have we done with our places that have made them weak and financially fragile? And in this place, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Even just go and take a look. The book is called You'll Pay for This, How We Can Build Lasting Prosperity for Everyone Forever, because of the challenge that we've created for ourselves. I'm kind of hitting this hard. I'll just go a little bit more. You're going to face the challenge that you've got large taxpayers in your communities. In the case of Mount Vernon, Washington, Walmart brings in, they get on an airplane from Bentonville. The pipe band is there to welcome them as they drop $327,000 on the desk of the city clerk. Meanwhile, the little folks at the Skagit Valley Food Co-op, they roll in. They only take up 0.22 acres of land within Mount Vernon. And so that when they drop off their $27,000, people are just like, thanks. And they move on. 327, isn't this amazing? The trouble is the amount of land that Walmart requires, the amount of land that the auto-oriented pattern of development requires of us, means that we definitely should not be doubling down on a pattern that pales in productive comparison. So that the tax revenue loss through the change in development patterns is substantial here. If they had built out their community as their downtown developed, rather than as the Walmart developed, they would be oodles more financially successful. we would be successful if we were residents of Mount Vernon. And in this context, when we ask, why isn't there money in the banana stand? It's because the folks from Bentonville have not been asked to bring a sufficient amount compared to what the folks at the food co-op are doing. And my fear for those that are in Ontario, this is Highway 413. It is going to be a doubling down on a pattern of development that we can identify and show is weak and fragile. It breaks my heart to see. I'm not being partisan. I'm being analytical. It breaks, which I guess emotions don't have a role in analysis. Okay, I'll just say I'm very alarmed and I'm very concerned. I love Ontario, love the communities here, but this is a type of pattern that we have shown does not work in our places, subverts the will of a place to actually thicken up and mature, and just siphons off opportunity to other places, and devotes a significant amount of natural land and farmland to being used for purposes other than it could be. And so this is part of the challenge. And this is where, in connection with that, this was meant for good. The suburban pattern of development felt like everybody has a roof over their head and a chicken in their pot and room to stretch their elbows. Remember, if you have studied city planning, you know that the early days, there was a focus on public health. We can't have too many people in the same space. They need access to sunlight. We've started to realize that parks play a really important role in helping places with that. But the idea is, what if we just follow a different approach? And it was the same sort of enterprising spirit that on the American side put people on the moon, provided a lot of vaccines. There was an analytical idea that we can just create the conditions in which we create great suburbs and it'll create lasting prosperity. But at Strong Towns, we're raising the alarm bell that it doesn't. And by subverting the ability to adapt to local needs, local pressures, to accept incremental change over time, we've hampered ourselves. We've hamstrung ourselves from actually being able to do what we need to create increasingly independent neighborhoods. Increasingly independent neighborhoods promote walkability without having to have campaigns for walkability. They promote cycling simply because it's more convenient than because you had to tell somebody to get on a bicycle or even subsidize their e-bike. We need a lot more things to happen by happenstance because we've altered the physical environment that makes it possible for them to see this. And out of this, at Strong Towns, what we endorse is a pattern of investment in our places that says, instead of waiting for grants, instead of trying to do big studies, I just, again, heard another story of a program where they got a $160,000 grant. They spent it on an architect that told them how to build a $1.3 million project. But they didn't have money for that project. At Strong Towns, we would say, if you have 10,000 or if you have 5,000, humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Ask the question, what's the next smallest thing you can do right now to address that struggle? Do that thing and do it again, and then repeat that process. And Sean, I want to bring you in on this because Medicine Hat embraced the 4-step process. And I think there's an application here because a lot of our sustainability initiatives in the city of Delta are grant-based. We have to get in a queue, wait for stuff to be sort of granted to us, and then we have to figure out, all right, how are we going to launch this program and do all of those types of things? Can you talk about the impact of some of the small but important steps that the city of Medicine Hat realized that they could take even without having to wait for help as you grappled with this? And it maybe mentioned also the Housing Accelerator Fund and its disappointment for the community.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. So I can talk on both of those. So the one challenge I faced was, I work for the municipality, so I'm not, I can't get into too much tactical urbanism or anything that I try to do. I need to get our engineers on board. So we had a lot of resistance from our traffic engineers with some of the ideas that we had on traffic calming, because we wanted to throw tires in the streets, planters in the streets. We wanted to do these kind of tactical road narrowing things. And we were really butting heads. But we came to a compromise and just reach out to your engineers and see what do we have on hand that we can work with, that we can install right away. And one of the initiatives that came out, and there was a Strong Towns article written on this, was just these candlesticks. They're just these white delineators that are just screwed into the ground. They can be put in 24 hours. Our employees know how to use them. They can put them in right away. They meet all kind of traffic safety standards, and that was highly successful. And it allowed us to kind of pilot projects as well. Does a street narrowing work here? Does it need to be larger? Does it need to be more narrow? So that was highly successful, and I'd recommend reading the article that Norm shared. And onto the Housing Accelerator Fund. That was an interesting one because we were meeting in the initial phase of that program. We applied for that federal grant to receive funding to increase housing in the city, and we actually made it past the first round. Then when we got to the second round, the federal government had imposed rules that you had to impose blanket zoning. And we knew that would not be successful here. We just knew that we were fighting a very strong headwind. And we pulled out of the program because we thought, it's just not going to work here. I'm going to be honest. Shoving blanket zoning and 8 plexes in every residential district in the city is not going to work. And we're going to end up having to pay this money back. We're out. And then you can see what happened in Calgary, for example, public hearings that last multiple days, several days, just for the blanket zoning to get repealed. So you have to work with, you have to work with the residents of your city. You cannot impose these kinds of things. So I'd encourage everyone, we're working through our brand new land use bylaw in Medicine Hat. So if you search Medicine Hat land use bylaw and shape your city, so that is our public engagement portal. We're working through a brand new land use bylaw where we can sensitively and more tiered-based growth within our city. So if you just want a high-level overview of what we're doing, check out our What We Heard report, which is in there, and it kind of shares the feedback we heard from the public. We did some really cool things with our public surveys where we used AI to analyze all the responses that we received. So everything was open format. Anyone could share whatever they'd like. And we could see that the tides are shifting. The feedback from especially our younger demographics is that, well, they can't afford the single family homes. They don't have $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 to buy a new home. So they have to shift towards these kind of smaller built forms. So yeah, things are changing here, I think, for the better. And yeah, that kind of sums up what's going on here in Medicine Hat.
Thanks, John. And I think that the 4-step process is actually something that can be added, for many of you and making some assumptions about the type of work that you're doing in your community. If it's similar to the way that our city's sustainability office is working, there's I have family members in Southern Alberta that are convinced that the government is guilty of overreach. And in their mind, much of that is fueled by sort of a narrative that's imposed on, grand, ambitious strategies, all of these different types of things that they're very fearful of. And in that context, what we at Strongtown see places doing is rebuilding trust with rapid deployment of small scale things that actually can make a difference. One of our principles around street safety, but it actually applies in this context too, of like, how do we become a safer and more sustainable community, is make the good visible even before you make it permanent. Make the good visible before you make it permanent can look like small steps. We have local conversation groups across North America and a couple places in the rest of the world as well. And in those groups, they've actually, just as citizens, embraced the 4-step process. And they've realized we need to build some benches at our bus stops. We need to be able to do trash pickups because the city's not going to be able to get to it. And there are probably great things that high school students can be working at. And I actually want to acknowledge in my city where I see the sustainability office, some of their strategies really are corollaries of this. And I think if we can ground that often, not just in like, how do we help things to be kickstarted, but also how do we do so in a financially sustainable way, we can really help our places. So that we make complex adaptation our default expectation. Now, the challenge that we have is that these two principles, half the room agrees that no neighborhood should be subject to radical change, or in many of our places even more. And then the other half starts to realize, yeah, but no neighborhood should be exempt from change. And at Strongtowns, we're seeking to make this possible. On the housing side, we say that we need to allow the next increment by right. This means that a minimum amount of regulatory friction is necessary to increase housing density. We would say that there are certainly still paths for people to skip increments. We would say go through the regular process where you have to bow and genuflect before the planning board, do all of those types of things. But we need to re-normalize complex adaptation over time. I'm going to go over just a couple. Yeah, actually, one of the challenges that we have in our places, for example, is you can identify parts of our community where housing could go, where places could become thickened up so that way now you would have a few more customers, a little neighborhood shop becomes a little bit more viable. In that context, you can identify as a sustainability exercise, where do we actually have land available that could be developed if we provide the right conditions for it to occur? Not requiring it, but making it possible. The trouble in my city, in Delta, this is a residential development, is that we get a development that scored really well. I went and looked at the scoring, but it required moonscaping. So they got rid of everything that was there. It required major change, a wholesale displacement. The construction period was significant. And it now means that this is yet another new type of development that is going to stay in perpetuity for a long, long, long time before it finally gets scraped and replaced. That is very different from a process that says, how do we create the conditions to which no assembly is required on the land use side so that you are incentivized to do the types of small scale sort of iterative projects that result in what Medicine Hat realizes been the secret to why their downtown is a money pot and not a muddy pit, is because they have this potpourri, this ongoing activity of renewal and refreshment over time. And this is where we would say that incremental development is core to the questions of sustainability as well. It builds wealth that stays in the neighborhood. It uses infrastructure that already exists. It heals the gaps that are left behind, and it expands housing opportunity. And I actually added in another slide, which is here's why they struggle. And you may have a role to play in this. We have some of our top-down sustainability strategies in my city that have made it really difficult to build starter homes, made it really difficult to build modest, low-cost structures. We've made it hard to build. We've professionalized the building trades to such an extent that it's really challenging to keep up with all of the brand new requirements, all of the increases in step codes, all of those different types of things that are, on the one hand, seemingly so good, and yet have ruled it out that we only have large players that are remaining in our markets. You probably have this in your place. Our official community plan, it's like angels have written it. And community engagement, I always think of, angels singing in the background as we want to be a walkable, lovable, delightful community. And then our zoning bylaw is like the curmudgeon that goes and takes it all away. So we actually can demonstrate in my city, we have all the time we've done updates to our zoning bylaw. And yet when we say, can we just tweak it to make it more permissive? It's actually, we've so frequently faced the opposition. No. We have to wait until we change everything. No, we don't need to change everything. Let's just get started on changing some of these things and begin to help. Because, and I'll close with this because I'm coming up on my time. We'll go into discussion in a moment. But I just want to reinforce, when we talk about the suburban pattern of development, we are saying, we can, at minimum, we don't have to impugn the motives of individuals excessively, but built into our codes and built into the thing that siphons off so much of our community's wealth, so much of our community's available tax resources, and puts it into things that seemingly are insurmountable. We have fights over $30,000 bike lanes in my community at council that take an hour, and then the roads budget for $3.5 million just passes as if it was just a passing thought. We have this dramatic imbalance. If you propose a good recycling strategy, it faces all kinds of barriers, and yet the constant replacement of existing single-family homes with just larger single detached houses, that's the thing that we make available. In that context, we have to grapple with the fact it's not personal, it's the system. And that system actually has, you can read it in our codes, at its first case is strategic exclusion by class and status and race. That's the reason we see minimum lot size requirements. That's minimum we see so many of the other sort of features of the suburban pattern of development that were even smuggled into our core of our communities. Downtowns that have parking requirements when they showed in their creation that those such things were not required. Downtowns that added setback requirements for no other reason than just to spread out development, to dilute the development pattern to meet an auto-based standard of living. Because the second element of it is resistance to change. If you're told you move into a neighborhood and nothing changes except your belly and your hairline, that's very different from being told you are part of a place that is persistently evolving. New participants are adding. Change is present but not radical. In that context, we can see in our suburban standards a very different approach. You need to go and basically everything is managed, and that top-down management has restricted our ability. And then third, the assumption of auto dependency. I'm sure you bump up against this all the time. It's in our codes. Most of our decisions begin and end with the question, can a car get there? Which requires most of our projects to be spaced out further than they otherwise would be, which removes the ability of most of our neighborhoods to allow for incremental adaptation, for someone to turn a front yard into a front yard business. What about the cars? What about all of those things? And actually, it's one of those things that I can't say we can conveniently ignore, but we can begin to downplay. On the flip side, saying when we know that we have more financially productive places, we will improve our places. And so I'm gonna pause. You probably didn't think I would ever pause, but I'm gonna pause there and just turn it over. I would love to know from you just some of the challenges that you're still facing in the communities and the places that you want this conversation to go. It would be awesome to have that involvement as well. And I'll share actually one quick thing. I'll share an article that touches on a little bit of our political strategy around the question of climate change. And it's a worthwhile article from a few years ago. It's provocative in its own way. I would definitely encourage you to consider it as you think about your own messaging around these initiatives. But with that, Nathan, back over to you. Sean, fantastic insights as well. Really appreciate it. But Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Norm. Thanks a lot, Sean. Really great conversation, and really starting to think about, some of that multi-solving. So to bring this back down to what we're thinking about in this community practice is high performance buildings, sustainable initiatives. And really, I think we need to look at where we can multi-solve. So if you can build a high performance sustainable building in areas that are, they don't have that right now, and you can kind of fill in those less dense areas in your community with those areas, so you reduce transportation costs, reduce vehicle miles traveled, and reduce emissions from that. And it really all goes together. I think that's kind of what I wanted to get out of this community practice, which is a little bit different than some of ours, is that, when we look at that multi-solving aspect, it's really where I think sustainability folks can have a lot more success. And I think that's really part of this conversation today. Mm-hmm. And if we have any questions, I don't think we have time for it, but please send them to me. I'll forward them to Norm and Sean, and we can get those answered to you there. And yeah, thanks a lot. Any last words? We have 1 minute from either of you.
Go ahead, Sean. I talked a lot.
Oh, just thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. Always happy to share. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. The work of working within local governments, connecting local governments with residents is so powerful. We know that we need that hidden alliance oftentimes between residents that just want to see better, and then the technical professionals and people that have the ability to see that implemented, even if there are many sleepless nights and times of real discouragement. This work profoundly matters, so I salute you. Really appreciate the energy and the focus here. So appreciate it.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone. Join us again on May 28th. We'll be back, and that'll be focused on contractors and building from contractors. And so, yeah, feel free to come back then. And thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.